Her true story. From Tennessee, my son and daughter-in-law left me at the airport with no money. They had no idea I was headed to meet my lawyer. You know what, Mom? We only bought you a one-way ticket. The return trip? You'll figure it out. That was what my daughter-in-law said as she rolled her designer luggage into the first-class lane, not even glancing back at me. She smiled, the kind of smile people wear when they think they are doing you a favor by telling you a hard truth. You've got a phone. Call someone to come get you. Or sell it. That'll cover a Greyhound, right? And just like that, they were gone. Gone through the security checkpoint, gone into the tunnel of airport gates and vacation selfies, gone with every ounce of dignity I still had left in their eyes. I stood there, alone, in the middle of Nashville International Airport, holding my purse tight against my chest. No suitcase, no boarding pass, no ticket, just a thin sweater and a printed itinerary I now realized was for show. They had never meant for me to come back with them. I had never been meant to be part of this trip at all. The noise of the airport swelled around me, calls for boarding, rolling suitcases clacking over tile, laughter in a language I no longer understood. I felt like a statue in a place that never paused. People glanced at me, then looked away quickly. One woman gave me a polite smile that melted into pity the moment her eyes dropped to the empty space where my luggage should have been. I wanted to disappear, and for a moment I did. Just hours earlier, I had woken up believing I was part of something. A family trip, they had called it. A healing getaway after the funeral. My husband, God rest him, had passed just 2 months ago, 42 years married. We buried him on a rainy Monday. They said I should get out of the house, get some air, and stop crying all the time. They said this trip would be good for me. So I went. I sold the last set of pearls he gave me, used the money to help with the flights. It's a group effort, they told me, smiling. Everyone's pitching in. But I never saw a receipt. I never saw the return booking. And I never questioned it, because I was taught to trust family, even when they stopped treating you like one. At check-in, I noticed Tanya's mother had a priority tag on her bag. She had a first-class ticket. So did Tanya and my son Mark. I assumed we'd all be sitting apart for boarding convenience. Tanya said they would come back and check on me after takeoff, but that was before they scanned my ticket and told me it had already been voided. Sorry, ma'am, it shows here that there's no return trip under your name, the attendant said, eyebrows furrowed with that mixture of politeness and dread people use when they do not want to deal with tears. I had smiled at her. There must be some mistake. But when I turned around, they were already walking away. I followed them to the security line, still holding my little folder of travel documents. And that was when Tanya turned, sighed, and said the words that I now believe had been rehearsed. You know what, Mom? We only bought you a one-way ticket, the return trip. You'll figure it out. She said it like she was telling me what the weather would be tomorrow. And when she added the part about the phone, sell it if you need bus money, Mark didn't correct her. He didn't even look me in the eye. He just adjusted his sunglasses and kept walking. They left me there, like an old receipt. Used, discarded, unneeded. I stood there long after they disappeared through security, too stunned to move, too proud to sit. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just breathed one shallow breath at a time. The last time I felt that kind of abandonment, I was 9 years old, waiting on a father who never came back from a short trip to the next town. And here I was again, full circle. Only this time, I had raised the person who left me. People kept moving around me. The world didn't stop because I did. A man with a baby stroller passed by. A woman herding teenagers in matching dance uniforms shouted over the din. Somewhere, a flight to Orlando was beginning final boarding. The sun was hitting the glass walls just right, and it hurt my eyes. I looked down at my phone, not because I expected a message from Mark, he wouldn't dare, but to check that it was still in my hand. It was the only thing I had left that said I existed, that I mattered. I thought about calling someone. But who? My sister passed years ago. My friends had their own grown children, their own pains. I wasn't about to call anyone and admit that I had been left behind at an airport by my own family. No, I would not hand them my humiliation. Instead, I took a deep breath, walked over to the nearest bench, and sat down with my back straight and my chin high. I might not have had a ticket home, but I had something else. Tucked in my bra, right next to my heart, was a small envelope. Inside was the business card of a lawyer, my husband's old friend, someone I hadn't seen in years but who had always said, "If you ever need anything, Blake, you come find me." And now, I would, because I might have been left with nothing. But that didn't mean I had nothing left to do. Grief does not knock when it arrives. It doesn't ask to come in. It crashes through the front door and sits in your favorite chair like it's always belonged there. That was what it felt like when Jake passed. Not sudden, but complete. One moment he was there, humming off-key in the kitchen, asking where I'd hidden the cinnamon, and the next he was slumped in the hallway, the mug of coffee still warm in his hand. A stroke, they said, massive, irreversible, final. We had been married for 42 years. 42 years of routines and rituals, of fights that ended with quiet forgiveness, of shared looks across rooms when no words were needed, of raising a son and losing a pregnancy and trying again, of watching life unfold in the shape of each other's laugh lines. He died on a Tuesday. It rained that morning. Not the kind of rain that makes you rush inside, but the kind that soaks into the bones without you realizing it. I remember standing at the kitchen sink hours after they took him, watching droplets slide down the window like they were trying to find their way home. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just listened to the sound of everything being quieter than it had ever been. The days that followed were a blur of casseroles and condolences. People I hadn't seen in years brought flowers and stories, most of which I was too numb to absorb. The funeral was short. Jake never liked being the center of attention. He used to say, "If anyone cries at my funeral, make sure they bring a mop." I tried not to cry, but I brought tissues anyway. After the service, I went home alone to the house we built together. The bed felt too big. The rooms echoed differently. His slippers were still under the nightstand. His toothbrush sat beside mine like nothing had changed, as if grief wasn't a thief but just a shadow, polite enough to knock before stealing everything that mattered. The weeks crawled by. Some days I didn't leave the house. I'd sit in the chair he loved most and try to remember the exact way he laughed when something was really funny, that belly-deep chuckle that made his shoulders bounce. I tried to remember how he looked at me when I came into a room. I tried to remember who I was before I became the widow. And then one morning, Mark came by. He hugged me, light and distracted, and said, "Mom, I was talking to Tanya and we think it'd be good for you to get away for a bit." "Away?" I repeated. "Yeah, just a short trip," he said, "to clear your head. We're thinking of taking the kids down to Florida for spring break. You should come, it could be nice." Tanya nodded beside him, all practiced sympathy. "Just to breathe a little. Change of scenery. Don't you think Jake would want that for you?" It felt like someone opened a window. I hadn't been out of Tennessee in over 5 years. The thought of sand between my toes, of sun on my shoulders, of not waking up to silence, it stirred something I thought was long gone. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Of course," Tanya smiled. "Your family. Family." I clung to that word like a life raft. Later that week I opened my jewelry box, the one I hadn't touched since the funeral. Nestled in the corner was the gold wedding band Jake had given me on our 10th anniversary. It wasn't expensive, but it was real gold. He'd saved for months and surprised me on a Tuesday morning, sliding it onto my finger with a whisper. 10 more years, then 10 more after that. I wore it every day until the day he died. Now I held it in my hand, felt its weight, its warmth, and then I let it go. I walked to the small pawn shop down the street and sold it. The man behind the counter looked surprised. "You sure, ma'am?" "I'm sure," I said, even as my throat tightened. I used the money to pitch in for the trip. When Tanya had mentioned everyone contributing, I assumed that included me, so I offered without being asked. It felt good to still be needed, to be included, to be more than just a photo in a frame. That night I cried alone in my room, not just for Jake, but because for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to hope. I packed my bag carefully. I placed a small framed photo of Jake in the pocket of my carry-on. I chose my softest sweater, the one he always said made me look classy as hell. I folded a beach towel I hadn't used in years and tucked a paperback I'd been meaning to read for months into the front pocket. And before I zipped it all shut, I placed a folded tissue in the top flap, just in case. I didn't know that by the time I reached the airport, all of it, the bag, the towel, the hope, would be gone. That the woman I had been, while packing, would not be the same woman left standing alone at gate B22, that I had not been invited out of love or grief or even pity. I had been included for convenience, for what I could give, not who I was. I see that now. But back then, in those days between the funeral and the flight, I believed in the story they told me, that I was still part of the family, that I was still wanted. I was wrong. There is a particular kind of silence that falls when you realize you are not part of the plan. Not forgotten, because forgetting implies accident. No, this is different. This is the realization that someone looked at you, considered you, and still decided you were disposable. It happened at the airline counter. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," the agent said politely, tapping at her keyboard. "There's no return flight booked under your name." I blinked. "I'm with my son's family, Monroe. The reservation should be under Monroe." She checked again, this time with a deeper frown. "I do see a Monroe group, but the return tickets are only for 6 passengers. You're not listed." She looked up at me with that rehearsed empathy they must practice in training, the kind that says, "I'm so sorry your life just cracked open, but I still have a line behind you." I felt my breath catch in my throat. There has to be a mistake. "We can check if there's a return flight available," she offered. "But it would need to be purchased separately." I didn't respond. I turned slowly, scanning the bustling terminal, and spotted Mark and Tanya near a coffee stand, laughing about something on her phone. I walked over, still holding my printed itinerary, the edges now damp from the sweat on my palms. "Mark," I said gently, "the agent says I don't have a return ticket. Can you check yours?" He glanced up, eyes darting, a flicker of discomfort flashing across his face before it was replaced by a half-hearted smile. "Oh, right, yeah," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "We figured you might want to stay a little longer. You know, enjoy some peace and quiet." My heart paused. "What?" Tanya chimed in, no pretense. "We only bought you a one-way, Blake. Flights are expensive. And let's be honest, you've got plenty of time. You're retired, right?" I thought this was a round trip," I said, voice thin, almost childlike. Tanya shrugged, sipping her coffee. "You're an adult, you can figure it out. You've got your phone, there's Wi-Fi, or call someone to help. This is a vacation, not a charity drive." I looked at my son. "Mark?" He didn't meet my eyes. "It just made more sense this way, Mom. We thought it'd be good for you to stay a few extra days, maybe even see some friends. I didn't pack for more days." "Well," Tanya said, now checking her nails, "there are stores." I couldn't speak. I just stood there, clutching that worthless itinerary like a shield. I realized then that I didn't have my suitcase. They had checked their bags together at the curbside drop-off. Tanya had waved off my small carry-on and told me, "Let us handle it, Blake. Just relax." It was probably still in the trunk. They hadn't just left me without a return flight. They had taken my luggage, too. "Where's my bag?" I finally asked. Mark looked at Tanya. She looked back at him. Then she said, "We're checking it with ours, but we can get it back to you later if you stay longer." I stood there, stunned. "So I don't have a flight. I don't have my things, and you didn't think I'd need to know that before we got to the airport." "You're overreacting," Tanya said flatly. "You said you wanted to be included. Well, this is how we do things, flexibly." Mark added, "We didn't mean anything by it. You're just so emotional since Dad passed, and we thought this would be easier." "Easier for who?" I asked. Neither of them answered. Instead, Tanya reached down, zipped up her designer bag, and said, "We've got to head to security. Our boarding group's almost up." And that was that. They walked away. No hug, no apology, no recognition that I had been reduced to an afterthought with a boarding pass. I stood there as they moved toward the TSA line, Tanya's heels clicking confidently, Mark carrying nothing but his carry-on and a face void of shame. For a moment, I felt like I was sinking, like the floor under me had given way, and I was slowly being pulled into the kind of loneliness no one ever warns you about, the kind that doesn't come from being alone, but from being discarded by the very people who should love you most. A woman pushing a stroller bumped gently into me and apologized. I nodded but couldn't speak. My hands shook as I stepped away from the flow of travelers and sat on a bench against the wall. I didn't cry. I was too far past tears. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, not to call them, not to call anyone in the family. I pulled up my notes app and typed a single line. "This will be the last time I trust them." Then I scrolled to the contact I had saved under the name J.R. Lawyer. Jake had introduced us back when he was still working. J.R. had handled our mortgage paperwork, our wills. He had always said, "If you ever need anything, Blake, I'll be there." I clicked the number and pressed call. When he answered, I didn't say hello. I didn't explain. I said, "I need to update my will," and just like that, my role changed. I was no longer the forgotten mother on a one-way ticket. I was a woman preparing to reclaim her voice. I looked at the boarding monitor. Their flight was on time.